Nestled along a dusty stretch of Route 66 on the outskirts of Santa Fe, New Mexico, stood a little roadside diner that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Its chrome edges were dulled by years of desert sun, and the old neon sign buzzed faintly above the entrance, flickering the word open like a heartbeat refusing to quit. Inside, the place breathed nostalgia. Worn red leather booths hugged the walls, checkered black and white tile floors clicked softly under the shoes of morning regulars, and every corner held the scent of strong coffee and fresh pie. But what made the diner special wasn't just its look, it was the music. Every day, from sunrise to closing, the soft hum of old jazz tunes drifted through the air like a warm memory. Ella Fitzgerald's voice, crackling through the speakers, felt like a gentle friend. Cheek to cheek, in a sentimental mood, as time goes by, songs that made folks slow down, smile, maybe even forget their troubles for a while. Locals said the music kept the place alive. Travelers said it made them feel like they'd stepped into a different world. But for Emily, the woman behind the counter with a tired smile and grace in her step, it was more than background noise. Jazz reminded her of who she once was, before life pulled her in another direction. When she refilled cups or wiped tables, her fingers sometimes tapped to the beat, her shoulders swayed ever so slightly. And when no one was looking, when the diner was quiet and the light fell just right, she danced just a little, like the music still mattered. Emily was 41, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't aged a day since she was a girl. She moved through the diner with quiet rhythm, pouring coffee like she was painting strokes on a canvas. Her name tag was faded, her apron worn, but there was something graceful about her, even in the smallness of her world. Years ago, she dreamed of dancing on big city stages. Ballet slippers, spotlight, applause. But life, marriage, money trouble, and a baby girl taken too soon, had turned those dreams into folded memories kept deep in a drawer she rarely opened. Henry Carlton, by contrast, was all edges. 66, tall and commanding, with silver hair always perfectly combed and a gaze that could freeze a room. He wasn't the type you'd expect in a place like that diner. Real estate tycoon. Private jet. A name whispered in boardrooms. But since his wife died in a car accident, he'd become a ghost of the man he used to be, harder, quieter, less sure of what mattered. The only thing tethering him to this world now was his son Teddy. Teddy was 9, though he looked smaller. Pale still, with sad eyes that stared straight through people. Since the accident, he hadn't spoken a word. He wouldn't eat on his own, wouldn't play, wouldn't smile. His left arm lay limp at his side, untouched by movement or hope. Doctors said trauma. Specialists said time. But nothing seemed to reach him, until the day he met Emily, and something unexpected stirred in the silence. It was just after lunch rush when they walked in, Henry Carlton in his pressed gray suit, and beside him the small silent shadow that was his son. Teddy didn't speak. Didn't look around. Just let himself be led to a booth near the window, where sunlight spilled in like warm honey across the table. He sat stiffly, one arm resting limp in his lap, eyes fixed on nothing. Henry ordered coffee and a grilled cheese. Teddy didn't even glance at the menu. Emily noticed. Not in the way servers are trained to spot a fussy guest, but in the way only someone with a mother's heart can recognize a child's ache. She didn't bring crayons or force a smile. Instead, she wiped her hands on her apron, walked over to the old jukebox in the corner, and pressed B7. The room filled with the soft hum of Fred Astaire singing "Heaven, I'm in Heaven." Then, with the grace of someone who hadn't danced in years but had never forgotten how, Emily stepped into the open space between booths. No announcement. No spectacle. She simply moved, slow, gentle, floating across the tiles like the song had taken her by the hand. Her arms flowed like silk, her feet whispering to the beat. It was a dance not meant to impress, but to invite. Teddy blinked. Just once. Then again. And then barely, so slightly you'd miss it if you weren't looking. His lips curled upward. The first smile in nearly a year. From across the diner, Henry stared. The coffee in his hand had gone cold. He hadn't looked away since the first note played. The next morning began like any other. Emily unlocked the diner just before sunrise, as she had for the past 12 years. She brewed the first pot of coffee, wiped down the counter, and turned on the soft jazz that gave the place its soul. She didn't expect anything different, just another quiet Tuesday in Santa Fe. But at 8:10 a.m., everything changed. A long black limousine pulled into the gravel lot, its polished frame comically out of place next to the rusted pickup trucks and dusty sedans. Emily paused, coffee pot in hand, as a man in a crisp black suit stepped out. He looked around, checked a piece of paper, and then pushed open the diner door. "Are you Miss Emily Reeves?" he asked, voice smooth as glass. She blinked. "Yes." "I've been asked to deliver a message. Mr. Henry Carlton would like to speak with you. He's invited you to his residence this afternoon." Emily's brow furrowed. "I what? Why?" The driver smiled faintly. "He said you'd understand." She stood there, stunned, still holding the coffee pot. The few early regulars turned their heads, whispering, "A billionaire's car. A formal invitation." It didn't make sense. She was just a waitress with sore feet and a tired heart. But in the back of her mind, she saw that boy's face, the flicker of a smile small and sacred. Something had shifted yesterday. Maybe in him. Maybe in her. She looked at the driver again, then down at her hands, trembling just a little. "What time?" she asked. The Carlton estate sat just beyond the city limits, an expanse of stone and glass perched on the edge of the desert, where the sun dipped low like a secret. Emily had never seen anything like it. As the limo curved up the private drive, she gripped her purse tighter, feeling painfully out of place. Inside, the house was silent. Too silent. No laughter, no footsteps, just the distant ticking of a grandfather clock and the soft creak of polished floors. A butler led her through a series of long hallways before stopping outside a sunlit study. Henry stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn when she entered. Only spoke, voice low and even. "I've paid more money than I care to admit to the best therapists in the country," he said. "Speech specialists, trauma counselors, behavioral experts. None of them reached him. None of them could make him smile." He finally turned, eyes meeting hers, not with arrogance, but with quiet desperation. "And then you danced," he said. "You danced, and for the first time in 11 months, my son moved." He smiled. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Henry stepped forward. "I'd like to make a request," he said. 1 hour a week. No therapy. No expectations. Just dance. For him." She blinked. "I'm not a professional," she whispered. "I'm just." "You made my son smile," he cut in gently. "That's more than the professionals ever did." She looked away, breath trembling. And then, slowly, she nodded. Emily sat alone in the back seat of the limousine, hands folded tightly in her lap. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting long golden streaks across the windows, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts swirled louder than the hum of the tires on the road. What was she doing? She wasn't a therapist. She had no degree, no training. She was a diner waitress who hadn't danced in front of anyone in over a decade. The idea of walking into a stranger's mansion to perform for a grieving child felt surreal, like a scene from someone else's life. And yet, she couldn't forget his face. That little boy, sitting so still, eyes clouded over like he was trapped inside himself. And then, just for a second, the smile. Small. Fragile. But real. Emily reached into her purse and pulled out a worn photo, edges soft from years of being handled. A baby girl, bundled in a pink blanket, stared back at her. Her daughter. Her heart. The one she held for only 6 days before saying goodbye forever. That loss never left her. It just settled deeper into her bones. Maybe that's why Teddy's silence hit her so hard. Maybe that's why she couldn't walk away. She folded the photo back into her purse and looked out at the road ahead. "I'm not doing this because I know how," she whispered to herself. "I'm doing it because I feel it." The limo turned up the drive toward the Carlton estate. She straightened her back. Ready or not, she was going back. The Carlton estate looked even grander in daylight, but Emily felt smaller inside it. The front door opened with a soft click, and she stepped into a foyer so wide it could have swallowed the entire diner back in Santa Fe. Marble floors stretched beneath her feet, polished to a cold, perfect shine. Tall windows let in streams of sunlight that painted golden lines across antique rugs and silent hallways. Everything gleamed, too clean, too still. It was a house made to impress, not to comfort. A house built for power, not for laughter. A butler showed her the way without a word, his footsteps muffled against the carpet. Along the hall, Emily passed by oil paintings in gilded frames and vases she didn't dare breathe too close to. But it wasn't the luxury that struck her most, it was the silence. No footsteps overhead. No music drifting from another room. No toys. No scattered crayons. Just stillness. When they reached the sitting room, the butler gestured inside and stepped away. Teddy sat alone on a velvet settee near the window, framed by long heavy drapes. His small frame was swallowed by the furniture, legs dangling just above the floor, eyes fixed on the garden beyond the glass. He didn't turn. He didn't blink. Emily's chest tightened. There were no scars on the boy, no bandages, but the wound was there everywhere, in the stillness of his hands and the distance in his stare. She stepped softly onto the rug, heart pounding. Somewhere behind a closed door, Henry was likely watching. But this wasn't about him. Not now. She didn't speak. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small speaker. And then, she pressed play. Word traveled quickly through the Carlton household. By the second week, whispers followed Emily through the halls. Quiet, clipped, wrapped in polite skepticism. The butler nodded curtly when she arrived, but his eyes betrayed a silent question. The head nurse, a woman with 30 years of experience and a clipboard always tucked beneath her arm, offered tight smiles that never reached her eyes. "She's the dancer," one of the younger staff had murmured near the kitchen. "The waitress," someone else corrected. From that diner out on Route 66. To them, she didn't belong. The family had flown in pediatric neurologists from Boston, trauma specialists from Chicago. Teddy's condition had been studied, scanned, documented in files thicker than phone books. Yet none had cracked the silence that surrounded him. And now, a woman in worn flats and second-hand cardigans was waltzing through the drawing room. The private physician, a stern man with a British accent and sharp suits, voiced it plainly one afternoon. "With all due respect, Mr. Carlton," he said, arms folded, "movement therapy is one thing. But interpretive dance by a waitress with no clinical background? It's unorthodox. At best." Henry didn't respond. He just stared out the window, jaw tight, watching as Emily moved through the garden with Teddy seated nearby, his right foot gently tapping to the rhythm of a jazz tune drifting on the breeze. Emily knew what they thought. She'd seen the sideways glances, heard the muttered doubts. But she hadn't come for their approval. She came for the boy who smiled when music filled the silence. Emily never asked Teddy to speak. She never pushed, never pried. She simply showed up, same day, same hour, carrying her little speaker and a gentle smile that asked for nothing in return. She'd lay out a small rug on the polished floor of the music room, kick off her shoes, and press play. And then she'd dance. Some days, it was just her. Arms swaying slowly, feet brushing the floor like wind through grass. Other days, she'd turn to Teddy and say softly, "You can tap along if you like, just with your fingers." At first, he didn't. He'd sit in the oversized armchair, his right hand resting in his lap, the left still limp and lifeless. But his eyes, they were watching. Carefully. Every twirl, every turn, every rise and fall of her shoulders. Watching like he was trying to remember something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Then one Thursday afternoon, as a quiet trumpet hummed through Moon River, something changed. The music floated through the room like sunlight through lace. Emily moved slowly, her back turned. And behind her, a soft sound, barely audible, came from the chair. Tap. Tap. She turned, heart leaping. Teddy's right foot was bouncing, just slightly, to the rhythm. Not a spasm. Not an accident. A choice. She didn't say a word. Just smiled and kept dancing, this time not alone. From the hallway, Henry watched. His son, silent, withdrawn Teddy, had made a move. Not because someone told him to, but because, for the first time in nearly a year, he wanted to. Henry watched from the shadows. Not because he meant to spy, but because he didn't know how to step into that space. The music room had become a world of its own. Soft jazz, slow movement, whispered connection, and it felt foreign to a man who dealt in concrete, contracts and control. Every Thursday, he stood behind the half-closed door, arms folded tightly across his chest, as Emily danced and Teddy watched. At first, the boy sat still. Then came the finger taps. Then the foot. Then one afternoon, Teddy let out the faintest chuckle when Emily spun too quickly and stumbled into a pile of cushions. Henry's breath caught. He wanted to believe it was real. But something in him, the part molded by years of boardroom battles and devastating loss, held back. Was this truly healing? Or just coincidence? A passing flicker in a damaged child's mind? He'd seen hope before, bought it in sterile clinics and private hospitals. He'd watched it flicker and die too many times. So he lingered in the hallway, safe behind doubt. Emily never asked for his trust. She never even looked toward the door. But once, as she folded the rug after a session, she said softly into the quiet room, "Real feelings don't need permission." Henry heard it. He wasn't sure if she meant it for him, or for herself. Either way, the words stayed with him long after the music faded. He wanted to believe. But he wasn't there yet. It started with a ping. Then another. Henry's phone lit up on the nightstand with message after message. Colleagues, assistants, even a board member or two. All forwarding the same link. A video. 37 seconds long. Shaky footage taken from behind a partially closed door, zoomed in just enough to catch the edges of the moment he thought was private. Emily was dancing, barefoot, graceful, light as wind across water. Teddy was seated nearby, his right hand tapping along to the rhythm, his eyes locked on her every move. It should have been something sacred. Instead, it was trending. The caption stung like vinegar on an open wound. Billionaire hires diner waitress to dance therapy for disabled son. Has he lost it? Below, comments poured in, sarcastic, cruel, curious. What's next? Singing baristas. Rich people are weird. Poor kid. He needs help, not some boho ballerina. Henry stood frozen in the middle of his study, the video looping silently on his screen. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled into fists. He felt exposed. Mocked. Betrayed. How had this gotten out? Who filmed it? And worst of all, had Emily been part of it? She said so little. Always so calm. Was it all an act? Had she been angling for attention? A book deal? A viral moment? Henry's world operated on control, reputation, discretion. And now, his most fragile hope, his son's smallest progress, was paraded across the internet like a circus act. His chest burned with anger. He made the call. "Tell her not to come back," he said, voice sharp, final. And just like that, the music stopped. Henry didn't sleep that night. He sat in his leather armchair, the fire in the hearth burning low, casting restless shadows against the walls. The house, usually silent, felt louder than ever, with the echo of that video playing over and over in his mind. He had let someone in. Not just into his home, but into the delicate wounded space where his son lived, a place even he hadn't dared touch since the accident. And now, it felt like a door had been opened not for healing, but for spectacle. The thought churned in his chest. Was it ever real? He remembered how she smiled as she danced, how Teddy's foot had begun to tap, how his son, his broken, quiet boy, had started to look alive again. Had all of it been orchestrated? The next morning, he didn't wait. He called the house manager and gave the order, his voice clipped and cold. She is not to return. Ever. No explanation. No conversation. Just an end. Later that day, a staff member quietly informed Emily. No one met her at the gate. No one said thank you. Her name was removed from the guest list, her badge deactivated. Just like that, she was gone, erased from the routine, as if she'd never been there at all. And Henry told himself it was for the best. Better to cut the thread now before it unraveled further. Better to protect what little remained of his son's peace. But that night, as he passed Teddy's room, he paused. No music. No tapping. Just silence. And for the first time in weeks, it felt heavy again. Emily didn't fight it. When the message came through the housekeeper, polite, detached, clinical, she simply nodded. There were no questions. No pleading. She packed her things quietly, the speaker, the soft rug she danced on, a pair of worn slippers tucked carefully into her canvas bag. The music room, once filled with motion and melody, now felt still again. Hollow. Before she left, she stood at the doorway for a long moment, taking one last look at the chair by the window where Teddy always sat. The boy hadn't spoken. He hadn't said goodbye. But she hadn't expected him to. Healing didn't always come with words. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a small square of cloth, white cotton, edges hand-stitched. A handkerchief. It was old, from her mother's sewing box, but clean and neatly pressed. She had stayed up late the night before, unsure why, embroidering something simple across its corner in blue thread. She placed it gently on the arm of Teddy's chair. Then she turned and walked out without a sound. Later that evening, when the room was empty and the lights dimmed, Henry walked past the doorway. Something caught his eye, a flash of white in the soft dusk. He stepped in, confused, and picked up the handkerchief. The stitching was careful. Precise. True feeling. Doesn't need a stage. He stared at the words, fingers tightening around the cloth. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't an accusation. It was just the truth. And somehow, it weighed heavier than anger ever could. It was 2 days later when the truth surfaced, quietly, almost apologetically. Henry was in the conservatory, staring blankly at the newspaper spread across his lap, when Marta, the longtime housekeeper, approached. She hesitated in the doorway, wringing her hands in a way she hadn't since the funeral. "Sir," she began, voice low. "There's something I believe you should know." He looked up, tired and unshaven, a man fraying at the edges. "It wasn't Miss Emily," she said. "The video. It wasn't her." Henry frowned. "What do you mean?" Marta stepped in, lowering her voice. "It was Lucinda, the nurse who left last month. She never liked Emily, thought she was overstepping. She said some awful things, thought it was absurd that a waitress could do what doctors couldn't. I found the footage on a backup server. Time-stamped. The angle matches the hallway camera, exact spot Lucinda was seen that day." Henry's breath stilled. The anger he'd clung to like armor cracked at the edges. "She leaked it?" he asked. Marta nodded. "I'm sorry. I should have come sooner." Henry stood slowly, as if waking from a fog. His eyes flicked toward the east wing, where Teddy's room sat in silence. "I thought she betrayed us," he murmured. "But she hadn't. She had simply danced." He moved without another word, heart pounding with a heaviness not of guilt alone, but of regret. He had driven away the one person who'd reached into the silence and pulled out something real. Henry couldn't sleep. Long after the house had gone still, he sat alone in his study, the glow of the monitor casting soft shadows on his face. The handkerchief Emily had left lay folded beside the keyboard, its stitched words still echoing louder than anything he'd read all day. True feeling doesn't need a stage. He pulled up the security footage. Click by click, he traced back to the afternoon of the recording, the hallway outside the music room. He remembered brushing off Marta's claims at first, but something inside him, some quiet nagging voice, told him he had to see it for himself. There it was. A figure in white scrubs, partially obscured, holding up a phone just inches from the cracked door. Lucinda. Clear as day. He watched the timestamp. She waited. She recorded. Then she glanced around, slipped the phone into her pocket, and walked away without a trace of hesitation. No remorse. No shame. Henry leaned back in his chair, the breath leaving him like air from a punctured tire. He'd blamed the wrong person. Worse, he'd pushed away someone who had given without asking, someone who had stepped into the quiet heartbreak of his home and offered a little light. His eyes drifted to the folded cloth once more. He reached for it, ran his thumb along the embroidered edge. Then, without another word, he rose from his chair and walked toward Teddy's room, drawn by something stronger than pride, stronger than doubt. Something that, for the first time in a long while, felt like hope. The card was small, no larger than a postcard, with rounded corners and a faded blue border. It rested on the nightstand beside Teddy's bed, half tucked beneath a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. Henry hadn't noticed it at first, too focused on the handkerchief clenched against his son's chest. But now, as he reached for it, his fingers trembled. The handwriting was shaky. Uneven. The pen had pressed too hard in places, faint in others, as though the hand behind it wasn't used to this kind of effort. And it wasn't. Teddy's left hand had remained still for nearly a year. Therapists had said the damage might be permanent. But here it was. Proof of something deeper than recovery. Love. The words were few, but they hit with the weight of 1,000 conversations left unsaid. Dad. I want her to come back. Henry sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, staring at the note, the breath catching in his chest. His son hadn't spoken a word since the accident. And now this, written not out of obligation, but out of quiet desperation. He looked over at Teddy. The boy wasn't asleep. His eyes were half open, fixed somewhere beyond the ceiling, but there was moisture at the corners. A glisten. A flicker of feeling. Henry pressed the card to his heart, shut his eyes, and for the first time since his wife's death, he whispered into the quiet. I hear you, son. And he meant it. The bell above the diner door chimed softly as Henry stepped inside. It was just past noon, and the place was quiet, only a few locals sipping coffee, the soft strains of jazz humming through the speakers. Nothing had changed. The red leather booths. The scent of pancakes and bacon. The jukebox blinking gently in the corner. But for Henry, it all felt different now. Emily stood behind the counter, wiping a mug with a dish towel. She looked up, and froze. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Henry removed his hat. I owe you an apology, he said, voice low but clear. Emily set the mug down slowly. You don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted gently. I made assumptions. I let fear talk louder than truth. I thought you had taken something from us, when the truth is, you gave something back. She didn't answer, just watched him with cautious eyes. He stepped closer, his voice trembling now. I don't need you to dance, he said. Not anymore. I don't even know if the dancing was the magic, or just the way you looked at him like he mattered. He paused. What I do know is that he smiles when you're there. And that's more than I've seen in a very long time. His gaze dropped for the first time, and his next words came quieter, thick with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. I'm asking you to come back. Not as a performer. Just as someone who makes my boy feel whole again." Emily blinked. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. The Carlton estate looked different now. Not because the walls had changed or the furniture had shifted, but because the air felt lighter, warmer. Laughter echoed through the long hallways. Music drifted from open doors. And once a week, the great sunroom overlooking the garden transformed into something it had never been before, a place of movement, joy, and possibility. Emily had returned, not as a guest, not as a servant, but as a teacher. She called it Dance and Feel, a simple name for something that went far beyond steps and rhythm. It was a class for children who didn't fit into neat boxes, who struggled with words or limbs or pain too big to explain. Some were in wheelchairs. Some never spoke. Some flinched at the touch of music. But Emily didn't ask them to be anything more than what they were. She moved gently, patiently, teaching them not how to dance, but how to feel safe enough to try. Teddy was always the quietest. He still didn't speak much. Still kept to the edge of the room at first, watching the others with those wide, solemn eyes. But slowly, over weeks, his arms began to lift. His steps began to follow. The music, once just background noise to his grief, began to reach him again. And then came the recital. It wasn't fancy, just folding chairs, homemade cookies, and proud parents sitting shoulder to shoulder in the sunroom. Henry sat in the front row, his hands trembling more than Teddy's. The music began, soft, steady, familiar. Teddy stepped forward. He wore a plain white shirt and soft canvas shoes. His frame was still thin, his left hand still shook. But when he raised both arms, slowly, deliberately, and let them move in time with the melody, the room fell into silence. Each motion was careful, like a language made of air. Each step was small, but sure. He wasn't dancing to impress. He was dancing to exist. Emily stood at the side, her eyes glassy, her heart in her throat. Henry, overwhelmed, covered his mouth with his hand. He didn't cry at business losses. He didn't cry at funerals. But today, he wept. Not because his son was perfect, but because his son was present. When the music ended, Teddy froze for a moment, uncertain. Then the room erupted into applause. Not polite, not rehearsed, real. Teddy blinked, stunned. And then he smiled. Wide. Alive. And the boy who had once been silent took a small bow. Long after the chairs were folded and the last crumb of cookie swept away, the music still lingered in the walls. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting golden light across the hardwood floor where Teddy had danced. Emily stood alone for a moment in that quiet room, letting it all sink in, the journey, the ache, the quiet miracle stitched together by music, trust, and time. She thought about how far they had all come. Teddy, once a boy locked inside himself, now moving with intention. Henry, once a man buried beneath grief, now clapping through tears in the front row. And herself, just a waitress with tired shoes and a bruised past, now helping children believe they could move again. Not because of therapy. Not because of science. But because someone dared to show up. Softly. Steadily. Without asking for anything in return. Healing, she realized, didn't always need words. Some pain lives too deep for language. Some wounds close not with explanation, but with presence. It doesn't take magic. It just takes one person brave enough to dance. Even when the room is silent. Even when no one is watching. Even when the world says it won't matter. Because sometimes, what reaches the heart isn't spoken. It's felt. And it moves, quietly, slowly, beautifully, like music in a child's first smile. If this story brought a smile to your face, please leave a like. It helps share a little more kindness with the world. And if you believe, like we do, that goodness still lives quietly among us, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more stories waiting to be told. Stories of healing, hope, and the quiet heroes among us. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We'll see you again soon.